Okay, good morning, Heather. Good morning from India, well, let's say good evening, Heather. Good evening from India. How are you this today?
I'm great. Thanks, Uta, and good morning from Canada.
So today we have a very special episode. It's a Q&A episode. It will be our first Q&A episode, and we'll probably make this a regular feature of our show, answering your questions. So it's a great chance for you. You can put out all the questions you have related to travel, horses, adventure. You can post them in the group. You can send them to us an email, and we will regularly think of all these questions and answer them in the show.
Thanks, Uta. It's going to be a great show. So as we, talk about these different questions that come in on the website, on the Facebook page, there has been quite a few questions that we thought would be great to discuss today. The first one was tipping. How much do you tip when you go on these amazing horse tours? And with the research that we did, we found it really interesting that, North American standards are anywhere 10, 15, 20%. I did find some that said, oh, well, we always do about $10 a day per person. And usually those tips are pooled amongst the whole team that does the outfitters that are putting together your tour. So not only the guide that's taking you on the trails, but also for who's helping with the meals, who's helping, feed the horses or tack horses. Just those in the background still need to be compensated, if you feel the service was outstanding. And with tipping, it always boils down to personal preference. Tipping has never been a mandatory type thing. So if you feel that the service was above and beyond, a few extra dollars doesn't hurt. But just keep that in mind that it is something that is always at your personal discretion. However, in other parts of the world, Uta found that, it's very different.
It's a very controversial issue. And I think this question pops up again and again wherever you go, because each country pretty much has their own rules. There's some countries where tipping actually is considered rude, such as Japan, Korea, China. So tipping there is an absolute no-go because you actually insult the people by offering them tips. It's also not very common in Australia, New Zealand, Scandinavia, because people there earn quite well. So in restaurants, for instance, you get a service charge on the bill, and then usually you just round it up. Now, tipping for guides, you do give a bit of a tip as well, because generally in horse travel, that is something which is considered a standard, because the stuff just tends to really take good care of you. But in these countries, the people earn well, so they're not really, they're not dependent on the tip like in other countries. So generally, in Europe, the Middle East, Africa, Asia, except for Japan and China, tipping is much, much more common. So there usually, again, this 10 to 15% rule applies, just pretty much the same as in the US or North America. So generally, yes, 10 to 15% is a good average, but you should still have a look when you go somewhere, check it out, do have a look. How much do you tip on your horse travel? There's the guides. You should never forget about all the people who are involved on these, particularly on the trails. If you go out on a horse trail, there's not only your guide, there's not only your cook perhaps, but there is like the kitchen stuff, the people who are like, bringing stuff from here to there, the drivers. All these people, they work in a big group and they work together as a team. So in the end of the day, they all like to have a little bit the share of the tip. So generally, I would always recommend, if you tip, pool all the tip together, put it in an envelope and give it to the manager or give it to the in charge of the team, give it to somebody who will distribute everything equally amongst everybody in the end.
That it really is great.
Yeah,
Great information. The one thing to keep in mind is to have the local currency available. So when you're putting that cash in the envelope, it's, at the end of your ride, you're probably not, there's not going to be a credit card machine, a debit machine. Cash is always the best. So if okay, my ride is going to be 6 days, and, I'm going to tip $80, have that $80 cash kind of tucked away before you start. So on the last day, you're not scrambling. Oh, I only have a $50 bill, or I only have a $100 bill. Make sure that you have, kind of plan in advance. All right. The standard is $15 a day. So I'm going to have my $60 ready to go.
Yeah, that's a very good advice as well, because particularly with credit cards, it's pretty difficult if you track out in the backcountry. I mean, most of the companies, they're happy to accept US dollar, they're happy to accept euro, hard currency cash. But I mean, having local currency is obviously always the best.
Right.
Great. I think that's pretty much it for tipping. As I said, do a little bit research before you travel to a country. Have a look what's kind of the tipping rules, how much is usually expected. You can ask your outfitter as well. They usually will tell you what people generally, give. If you're happy, give a little extra. Everyone will be happy, and it's a big team and it's a big work actually, particularly out on the trail, because everyone goes out with you for 6 days, 10 days, whatever. They're away from the families. They're working pretty much all around the clock for you to make you comfortable. So tipping is always great to show your appreciation of their hard work. Great. Do you have anything else for the tipping?
No, I think that's good. Let's move on to the next question.
Good. Let's move on for another question, which very frequently has popped up so far. It's visa. Now, generally, for some countries you travel to, you do not need visas, but for other countries, you will do need a tourist, or mostly for horse travel related things, you need a tourist visa. So I would always suggest you go ahead, check out what you need to know. When you plan, if you're not sure, you can actually consult the internet or go to the website of the embassy of that country you're visiting. Check out all the information concerning your immigration into that country. What do you need? Where do you get the visa from? There's a lot of countries that offer visa on arrival. So you actually travel to the country, and at the airport, you can get your visa for a small fee stamped in your passport, such as, for instance, Thailand is like that, or Kuwait is like that. A lot of countries like that. But in other countries, you have to actually get your visa before you start the travel, and that sometimes does take some time, and you might have to actually send your passport to the embassy or go yourself to the embassy, put your passport there, and it takes sometimes up to a week or 2 weeks until you get that visa stamped in. So keep in mind, you might need some time. Do your research well in advance. And then that you don't need to rush, or you don't need to think, oh my God, I don't have the time, I have to quickly do this, otherwise I'll not get the visa back on time. So that's very important, to always make sure that you have enough time to hand in your passport and get the visa done. It's not so many countries anymore, although it depends obviously what kind of passport you're holding. It always depends on the nationality of a person. Usually American, Canadian, German, British citizens do not need so many visas. For many countries, they do not need a visa, but they can actually go to the country, arrive at the country, they don't need a visa. But if you, for instance, have another nationality, maybe if you have a passport of an Asian country or a South American country, it might be a little bit tougher for you to get the visa for the country you want to travel to. So I always say, do your preparation. That's always important. Think of these countries. Make sure you have all the information ready in advance before you go. And I always say preparation is the best way to success.
I
Another
100%.
question?
Sorry.
Okay.
I
No, go ahead.
100% agree. Preparation is so important. Do your research. Know what's required. When you're making your travel plans, ensuring that the country passport that you hold, you're allowed to, if you're transiting through another country, ensuring
Exactly.
that your passport is allowed to transit through that country. I do know the US has added a lot of restrictions on who's not allowed to transit through their country. So that's something to really take into consideration. Most times when you're planning these great holidays, amazing adventures, you're looking at it probably 6 months in advance. So, you should have lots of time to prepare, send your passports away for if a visa stamp needs to be put in it. You had mentioned a few countries. I know Australia, it's all done electronically. Traveling to Mexico now from Canada, it's electronic. You can do it all online. It's easy peasy. So preparation, I think, probably has to be that would be your number one most important thing that you need to look after.
Exactly. Now, there's always also popped up the question about which visa you need to do volunteer work. That again, of course, it depends on which country you travel to. Only thing is what I'm saying here, do be careful. Make sure you know which visa exactly you need for doing volunteer work, because a lot of countries, or not a lot, but a few countries, India, for instance, they require you to get a different visa from a tourist visa. You're not allowed to actually do volunteer work on a tourist visa in India, for instance. So you need to have a working visa. It's a special working visa, and you usually get it without much fuss for the time you're doing your voluntary work. But still, make sure that you get the right visa for whatever purpose you want to do in the country, because if you're on the wrong visa, it's illegal and you can get into serious trouble. So when in doubt, email or phone the consulate or the embassy. They're usually happy to give you any information you need. And sometimes it's good to get the information you want in writing, so that you do have a proof just in case, to make sure that everything goes well. So again, prepare yourself, make sure you get the right visa. I mean, helping out in some kind of animal shelter a day, you can do that fine on a tourist visa usually. But doing like a 4, 5, 6 months of volunteer work, maybe getting a little bit of extra income on the side, make sure that you're on the right visa, because you do not want to get in trouble in a country not your own.
Exactly. Great advice. So moving along, some of the questions that we have popped up, and questions that you and I have asked ourselves. What sort of questions should you be asking your tour operator when you're doing your research on picking a destination? So we'll go through some of those, and hopefully we can answer all the questions that everyone has on how to pick a tour operator and riding trip.
Exactly. Yeah, Heather, I think it's so important to ask the right questions in advance, because the biggest issue, we are dealing here with our holidays. So the holidays are your most important time of the year, really. It's the time you want to enjoy yourself. You don't want to compromise. You want to really relax and, get away from all the stress at home, from all the stress at work. So it's so important that you kind of make sure you get the right holiday, you get the right trail, the right horse track, which is suitable for you, that you really have a great time. So it's important to ask the right questions in advance to make sure that the program you've chosen is the right program for you. And I mean, a lot of people, they say, oh, I don't really care so much whether I stay in tent or whether I stay in a hotel or whether I do 7 hours riding or whether I do 4 hours riding. But the fact is, ask yourself, be honest to yourself, what do you really want to have from your holiday? And then go and choose the right vacation for you. So yeah, Heather and me, we have kind of chosen a few questions. So we'll straight roll on the first one, I guess, and that's concerning the different meal plans and what is included in the price you get. Now, very often, there's a lot of these nice sorry, Heather, how do you call that in English? If there's like MAP on AP?
Acronym.
Abbreviations?
The acronyms.
Acronyms.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, you cut that out, right? So very often, when you look at the description of the ride, there's a lot of acronyms. So there's like AP and EP and CP and MAP, and a lot of people have virtually very little idea what that means. So I want to just quickly march you through these things, that you next time you plan your booking, you plan your trip, you get an idea of what all these acronyms actually mean. So one which people usually know is the AL, that's all inclusive, or AE, actually all inclusive. That can sometimes differ what is included, but usually it means all meals, most of the beverages, at least the non-alcoholic ones. Sometimes there's sports and recreational activities, usually everything which is kind of listed up. Still, sometimes it's a good idea to kind of ask the outfitter what exactly is included in the all-inclusive program. Another plan is the AP, that's the American plan. It usually includes 3 meals a day and sometimes your non-alcoholic beverages. Again, make sure, check, are the beverages included, or is it just water or tea in the morning? Tea, coffee usually is included in the morning, but not everyone includes non-alcoholic beverages other than water. On the other hand, for instance, on rides in Italy and Spain, very often you have wine included, wine and water, but not cold drinks or soft drinks, because wine is so, everyone drinks wine, a lot of wine in Italy and Spain. So you have this so-called table wine, which is very often included in your rates because, well, as I said, everyone drinks it there and it's much cheaper than Coca-Cola or Pepsi or Fanta and stuff like that. Another plan is a continental plan. That's usually comes from continental breakfast because that's what's included, just a continental breakfast. Usually no other meal is included in the CP plan. Then you have the European plan, which means no meals included. That's usually not much on the horse trails or horse tracks. Sometimes if you book a stationary ride somewhere or a stationary program, you have EP plans, but it's generally not so common on rides. Now, to make matters worse, we also have the MAP, that's the Modified American Plan. The American plan is 3 meals a day, and the Modified American Plan includes 2 meals a day. In Europe, very often people do not mention these plans, but they go for half board or half pension, or full board and full pension, or B&B, which is obviously bed and breakfast. Half board, half pension includes 2 meals a day, and the full board or full pension includes all your meals. So it's quite complicated, particularly sometimes as even that is not 100% guaranteed of what you get, particularly with beverages. Alcoholic beverages are usually separate. You have to usually pay separately for them, except for the table wine. But if you're not quite sure, just ask your outfitter about what exactly is included in the rate.
Great, thanks, Uta. So the next question is on transportation. Are the airport pickups included? Are the transfers to your first stop in the ride, or where you start the ride, pardon me, depending on, is it a point-to-point ride or is it a base stay? Those kind of things are really important to find out, because if you're doing a point-to-point and you start in London and you finish in Paris, and your car is in London, how are you getting back to Paris? So those type of things are really important to ask, and what the cost is. If they have a fee for picking you up at the airport, or if there's a transfer point where you can meet them if you're already in destination, and really clarifying what the cost is, and do I pay that up front, or is that included in my package, or am I going to have to pay 50, 60 euros to the driver that picks me up? Those kind of things are super important, because you don't want to, your airport is probably going to be, a few miles away from where you start your ride. So those type of things are important, as well as if it is a base stay, do they provide parking for you to keep your vehicle there? And then again, if it is a point-to-point, do you do a complete circle and end back where your vehicle is, or do they provide a transfer back to that original starting point? So, again, research, that's something that, again, we keep circling back to research, preparation. Those are the key words of today's episode, clearly.
Yeah, exactly. That's very important. Also, you should ask, in case they provide you airport transfers, just ask them what time these airport transfers are, if it's like one airport transfer a day, or do you need to be at least 3-4 people, or do they do it for every single rider who arrives? Particularly make sure that you know that before you book your flight, not that they kind of say, okay, we do a transport from the airport to the ranch every day at 10 o'clock and you arrive at 11:30. That kind of, is
defeats
bad
the
planning.
purpose, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
Good. Third question, style of riding, style of tack, horse breeds, horse type. Now we all know there's English riders and there's Western riders, and of course there's plenty of other styles too, but that's kind of the two main ones. And a lot of the English riders do have some problems kind of going into the Western saddles and tag, and the opposite is true as well, I suppose. Not everyone, but there is, I know from my experience, there's a few riders who kind of, when they come from the English field, they do really struggle with fenders and the horn, or if they come from the Western style, they really do struggle with these tiny little slippery English saddles without, you know, the comfortable horn to hold on to in emergencies and stuff. So if you've never kind of done any Western riding and you know you want to go to Canada and do a 10 days trek up into the wilderness, maybe it's a good idea to kind of just try out a Western saddle before you go. Just see how comfortable you get in that, see that your own riding equipment kind of feels good in that type of saddle. Like usually when you ride Western saddles, jeans are really nice and comfy, while when you go for an English style of tack, it might be advisable to go for some breeches rather than a jeans, because the jeans can very easily rub at the stirrup leather. So that is something you should always kind of ask in advance so that you're kind of prepared. Obviously the horse breeds and or type of horse is like, when you go to Spain you kind of expect a Spanish horse, or if you go to the US you want a quarter horse or an Appaloosa or a paint. So usually the horses on these treks and horseback holidays are local horses. Still, do make sure, check out, ask what kind of horses they provide, because in case, you know, if you go to Spain and you dream of riding that beautiful Baroque style pura raza española, you know, gray with an amazing long mane and tail, and then you end up with a tiny little chestnut Arab cross like the Cruzados, they have a lot in Spain too, you might be a tidbit disappointed, even though this horse might be perfectly suitable to cross the Sierra Nevada with you, right? But just to make sure that you research a bit the style of riding, the kind of saddle and tags, the type of horses, make sure you know also if they're small horses or bigger horses. One more thing, personal experience, if you're very tall, you might think of bringing your own stirrup leathers if you travel to countries where there's not really a lot of very good equipment or tech, like the Arabian, like the Middle East, India sometimes, some African countries, some Northern African countries like Egypt, because people there tend to be much smaller. And very often the standard stirrup leather is not that very long, not suitable for somebody who's bigger than 1.85 m European guy. So yeah, that's kind of my personal advice, because I've experienced that before, and it's actually a living nightmare if you go on a 10 days trek and your stirrup leathers are actually a tidbit too small for you.
Yeah,
So,
great advice. The next question that we have is the speed of the ride and the riding terrain. If, and really depending on your riding comfort level, if the ride is going to have lots of gallops, or is it more of a, we're climbing mountains, so it's going to be slower paced, more walking. Those are things that you really want to find out, because if you're dreaming of going and galloping up and down beaches, and then you get on a horse and are like, oh, and today we're going to walk for 6 hours. It like we said at the beginning, these are your dream holidays. You've spent a lot of money. You want to have a holiday that meets your needs. So making sure that that you're confident enough to do gallops on the beach on a different horse, as well as, when you're going, the terrain, is there going to be, if you're wanting a gallop on the beach, ask that question. Are we going to get gallops on the beaches, or is this more, we're riding on roads, or we're more in trails in the mountains? Those are questions that are so important to ask, because you don't want to be disappointed.
Exactly. That's indeed. Plus also mountain rides can be technically quite difficult. And also sometimes when you ride in the high mountains, like in the Andes or in the Alps, there's also parts of the ride you actually have to get off your horse and walk your horse. Sometimes even for quite a while. Like I rode a couple of times in the Alps. And some of these climbs, which are quite slippery and steep, you actually get off the horse. And what they often do is you can kind of trail the horse in front of you, like you just hold to the tail in front of the horse in front of you, so that you get pulled up. But still, if there's a lot of walks, like a lot of times you have to get off and you have to walk on your own feet, you might want to consider having a pair of good hiking boots, actually, rather than boots only suitable for riding. So that is indeed a very important question to ask.
Right. Great.
Yep. Next thing, group size. Minimum, maximum number of riders. Very, very important, because you always want to make sure there is the required minimum of riders, because otherwise you sign up for your dream ride and you pay up all the money and you book your flights and everything is kind of done for you. And then a couple of weeks in advance, they kind of call you and say, sorry, we only have you're the only rider basically, so we can't do that ride. So it's always good to ask how many riders or how many people you need minimum on the track, on the trail, and how many people have signed up so far. Like if you're a group, that's always good, because then there's no chance of that happening. But if you're a single rider, and I know from experience there's lots of people traveling single on these trails, just make sure that you know that the trail is definitely happening, that there's the minimum amount of riders. And yeah, so that's important. Maximum number of riders, of course, you want to know as well. Well, I always say it's not really fun to have more than 8 or 10 riders going, on one trail, because then it really kind of gets crowded in the villages. It kind of gets crowded on the trail. You have to swallow a lot of dust if you ride somewhere in the end. Chances of people not getting along with their horse are bigger. So yeah, that's another thing to consider if you're checking for the maximum number of riders. Most outfitters, I think, have maximum numbers of 8 to 10 usually, which is reasonable. Also, you might want to ask how many guides they take along in case of big groups. So very often outfitters have actually 2 guides, so there's a chance of dividing the group, which is very nice if you have some riders with you who do not want to go that fast, or who want to go faster than you like. So it's always nice to be able to have this option to know, okay, in case we are like 10 riders and we have a couple of riders which are just not really up to the riding standards, the group can be divided into 2 smaller groups. So that's maybe something you might want to ask.
Yeah, I totally agree with the big group. You lose some of that intimacy that you get when you're riding with a smaller group, because a lot of times the guide will be giving information as you're riding, like over,
Exactly.
that mountain over there is this, or, this is a really popular beach area that we can have lots of gallops on, or even, what kind of tree is that over there, or
Exactly.
those kind of things. So it is important. And the smaller groups do, you get to know everybody, you get to know your guide, and it does feel that the intimacy is there. Next on our
Exactly, Heather.
list is accommodations. That probably has to be my number one question that I always ask. Where are we staying? Are we in hotels? Are we in bed and breakfast? Are we camping? Is there running water? I at the end of my day, I do need to have that hot shower to soak the old bones and the muscles and those kind of things. So, knowing what the level of accommodations that you're staying at is super important.
Right.
As well as you had mentioned before, so many solo riders are going on these tours, because it's a great advantage. You're a single person, you're wanting to go on the ride, you get to the ride, and now you're immediately with a group, which is great. So you kind of have like instant friends. But do these accommodations allow for single riders? Do they have, is there a supplement added if you come solo? Do you have the opportunity to share if you'd like? Those type of questions are super important, because not everybody wants to just be partnered up with a stranger and have to share a room with. If they're comfortable
Exactly.
with that, then that's great. But if they really, want to have their own room, then those opportunities need to be found out.
Exactly. A lot of outfitters actually do not offer the single room possibility. So it's always good to ask. And particularly if there's like, if they don't say anything about single rooms available and stuff, basically most of these rates generally are for double accommodation, shared accommodation. So just ask in advance. If you really want to have a single room, just make sure that you ask in advance, that you tell them ahead of time, check. Usually you have to pay a little extra charge for it, which is totally fine. Just ask in advance if it's possible and what it costs, and tell them in advance, because otherwise once you're there and then, you know, they kind of find another person to share the accommodation with you, and you don't want to do that. So it's good to let them know in advance, hey guys, I want a single room, I want my own private bed, and I don't want to, you know,
Share with a
cope up with,
stranger.
yeah, exactly, you know, cope up with a snoring stranger and you know, making your nights a hell.
Exactly.
Also check for bathrooms, because in some simple accommodations, very often, you know, when you have these treks out in the countryside, you're really far away from a lot of touristy infrastructure. So they're not really great hotels, but usually hostels. You know, you sleep in monasteries, you sleep at farms, you sleep at, God knows, there's so many different accommodations. So quite often there's only shared bathrooms. Quite often the accommodation is quite simple. Sometimes there's just common rooms. So make sure you ask all these things to make sure that you're comfortable. Because again, that thing is your holiday. You really want to, particularly accommodation is so important, because you can have the greatest ride, the greatest horses, the greatest company. But if you're miserable where you're staying overnight, the whole trip kind of gets a bit
Right.
tainted, because, well, it's just so important, particularly at a certain age. You just want to have a nice little, you want to have a nice wrap up of the day. As you said, soak these bones in some hot water. Do not cope with, you know, snoring co-inhabitants. Maybe not deal with any type of, you know, whatever animals which might come into your room and stuff like that. So ask about accommodation. That is one of the most important things you should ask, and make sure you're comfortable with wherever you stay in advance.
Yeah, 100%.
Good. Running straight, running straight into the next point. Internet and electricity. Oh, that's so super important nowadays. It wasn't so important, I think, 10 years ago, but nowadays with all the, you know, everyone has to be on social media like 24 hours, 7 days a week. And, you know, it's so super important to check on WhatsApp what's happening to the family at home, and make sure, you know, the kids are all right, the husband is fine, everything. And of course, all these gadgets, like in the olden days, people had like a phone which had a battery which would last like 2 weeks. And everyone had like one camera, and that was it. Nowadays, people have helmet cameras, and they have the iPad, and they have iPhones which kind of need regular charging. And they have, of course, the camera and the big camera and God knows what. There's so many gadgets these days people carry along, and they all eat electricity. So just ask in advance, where can you charge all these things? And is there internet? Usually out on trails, there is no internet. Although in many countries, you can actually buy a SIM card for very little money, and buy kind of internet, kind of some, how do you call that? Some
Power bar.
internet. Sorry?
The power bars.
Yeah, no, the power bus, yes. No, but you can actually buy some data packages on a SIM card, like a local SIM card. Like when you come to India, you can buy a SIM card, you can buy a data package, and then you can actually go online. And if you're lucky and you have a good coverage, you usually are covered in that, on that field. In some countries, obviously, there's no mobile connection once you're out on trail. As I said, electricity very often is sketchy. So nowadays people have power banks. So I can really advise you, buy a good power bank, bring it along with you, charge it full, and then usually you have enough power to last you for a couple of days. But yeah, it is kind of a big topic nowadays. So you want to make sure that all these gadgets you bring to kind of document your adventure actually have enough juice to last you through the trip.
And another thing to keep in mind, that the voltage is different between North America, Europe,
Right.
Asia, that making sure you're having the proper adapters, converters to change it from 110 to 220 or 220 to 110. You can buy those converter adapters pretty well, you know, at most major, you know, Walmart, little travel stores that sell luggage, those kind of things. But that is something, be nothing more frustrating than arriving somewhere and you're like, oh, I can't plug in my phone because I don't have the
Indeed.
right adapter. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, indeed. Particularly with North America and Europe, the 220 to the what type of voltage you have? 110, right?
Correct.
Exactly. So we have 220 in India and most of the rest of the world, I guess. So yeah, plugs also important. Bring a travel plug is always good to make sure that you can plug in everything.
Right. Which then leads us into the next question of really what do you need to bring? So, bringing your converter charger, but knowing from your tour operator, do we need to bring a sleeping bag? Do we need to bring our own towels, face cloths, flashlights? Traditionally, most tour operators will provide you a list of all the things that you need to bring. But asking, if we're going to be camping, do I need to bring my own sleeping bag, etc.? Because you will have to need extra luggage then, probably, if you're traveling internationally. If you're flying, if you're going in the car, then that's a little bit different. But if you're flying and you need to take a sleeping bag, that's probably going to change your luggage size or how many bags that you need to take. But a lot of times they will tell you, that a flashlight is handy for, if we're going out on if you're wanting to tour around at night just by yourself and you're wanting to look at the stars or those type of things. But in a lot of countries in Europe, they don't use face cloths. Face cloths in North America are wildly popular. Every hotel you go to, they're hand towel, a face towel, body towel. But in Europe, face cloths, they just don't exist. So if that's something that you like to use all the time, then you want to throw one in your bag. As well as really looking at the country that you're going to. Is it going to be hot? Do I need to bring extra sunscreen? Do I need to bring
mosquito repellent?
Mosquito repellent? Yes, I think that's a constant. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, you need mosquito repellent.
Maybe not in the desert.
Well, they would find me. They like my blood.
Possibly.
Yes.
Yeah, that is definitely a big thing. Most outfitters actually provide you with a list of things you need to bring. You always want to make sure you have enough light when you go out on a trail, because very often there's no electricity in the camps. When you're camping out in a very basic camp, there is maybe some gas lighting, but usually there's no individual lightings. There's candles and gas lights. So you want to bring a very useful item as a head torch. One of these things you can actually put on your forehead, and so you have the hand free to brush your teeth or eat your food, and you still see what's on your plate.
Right,
or
a helmet light.
A helmet, yeah. Well, I mean, there's the helmet lights and there's the ones you put just on your head. So these are pretty useful actually. So a good lighting is really important, particularly if you need to get out at night. Go to the bathroom. And you don't want to stumble over, your tent ropes or,
right.
So it's always good to ask that. Also, mosquito nets sometimes is a good item to bring. There's these travel mosquito nets, particularly if you travel into tropical countries. That saves a lot of headaches sometimes. Well, yeah, sleeping bag you mentioned already. Yeah, so that's always a good question to ask.
Right.
Great. Wrapping up this episode with the question, what is the best time to travel? So each destination usually has a good season to travel because, well, there are some areas, the tropical countries, usually they have the same weather or the same season, or they usually have like a dry and a wet season. But most temperate countries actually do have winter and summer. So they can usually advise you, well, if you go to Iceland, most people go in summer because, well, winter is just cold and dark, even though some people like the winter as well. A good friend of mine went to Iceland in winter and she loved it because you see the northern lights and, well, you ride in the snow and then the ice, which is pretty particular too, but it really depends. So I would always ask the question, what's the best time to come? You don't want to come when it's really, really hot or when it's really, really wet. and you can prepare yourself. So if you know, okay, you come to India, you ride in India, say in December, which is one of the best times to ride there, but it can get quite cold at night. So they usually tell you, or you can actually look at the climate charts. What is the minimum temperature? What's the maximum temperature? How much rainfall will be there? So these are all important things to know, that you can really organize your travel, that you can organize what to take, what to bring. Like you'd be astonished. It can get quite cold in India in December. And even though most of the time it's sunny and fairly warm during the day, the nights can be really chilly. And when you're out camping, I always advise people bring like a woolen cap, bring a shawl and bring a nice warm jacket and woolen socks to sleep in. So a lot of people, they always say, oh, India, well, that's a hot country, right? So I don't need to bring all these wintry woolen stuff. But it's not always like that. Or if you kind of travel on a great height, like if you go to South Africa or Lesotho and you ride up in the mountains, nights can be really chilly as well. So even though daytime temperatures are warm, nights are grueling cold. So come prepared. Same in any desert country. Days are really hot, sunny. You need a good sun protection. You want light, cool clothes, but nights are cold. So it's very important to know what type of things to bring, what type of time to travel, and how the weather, the climate, and the temperature is going to be.
That is great information. One thing to add, a lot of the tour operators or outfitters will indicate which is high season for their tours.
Yes.
And that'll usually give you a good indication that, if high season is May and June, that's typically their, most popular time or best time to go visit that country.
Yeah, or even sometimes it's not even the best. Like, for instance, if you travel to Europe, July and August usually is high season for Central Europe, because that's the time people have holidays. So, but still, if you want to ride in France, I would kind of avoid July and August to go riding there, because it's like so packed with people. Everyone is out on holidays. Like everyone kind of flees the cities and goes in the countryside and does these type of tours. So going in May, June, or September, October can be actually much, much nicer. And it's not the high season. It's already kind of the mid-season. It's not off-season, obviously, but it's kind of the mid-season. So it's worthwhile to do some research into what time people actually have vacations there. And it might actually be advisable, if you can choose your travel time, go a little bit ahead or after the main vacation time in that country.
And another thing to take into consideration is whether you're traveling in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere, because the seasons are going to be swapped.
Reversed.
If you're in South America, you're going in July and August, well, that's going to be their winter months. So that's also something to take into consideration. Well, this has been great, Ute. I think we're getting into a flow here of how our podcasts are going. So I just want to thank everyone for listening to our podcast today. On behalf of Ute and myself, we look forward to you joining us again soon. If you like the show, hit the subscribe button so you will not miss any new episodes in the future. If you'd like to give us some feedback or suggest a topic for a future show, please send us an email or message us via Facebook, or simply leave us a review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or Stitcher. The greater reviews we receive, the more like-minded people can find our show. Our goal is to provide you with all the information you need to feel confident to go on your own equestrian adventure. So until next time, happy trails.
Happy trails. Good.